It's great to be in the SEC. Thanks for tuning in to the SEC Recap Podcast. I am your host, Ben Warren. Today, we're talking about them dogs, them Georgia Bulldogs, repeating as national champions. We're going to talk all about that absolute beatdown the dogs laid on them Horned Frogs. And we're going to do a recap of all the SEC bowl games from this season. However you're choosing to listen to the SEC Recap Podcast today, whether you're starting your day, ending your day, or taking a midday break with it, I thank you for being here. If you're listening in audio form, there are no real episode notes today. If you're joining me on YouTube, it's going to be mostly visuals and some screen caps for you guys. I am kind of riffing today. I am going a little bit off the cuff, but you know what? It feels really nice after all those bowl game previews and all the stat research and putting together those graphics. It feels nice to kind of just sit down and do an episode without having to pour over graphics and stats and double and triple check things just to make sure I have it right. Man, let's talk about this national championship. Georgia Bulldogs over TCU 65-7. Now, I did a full preview of this game, gave my score prediction, and I picked 38-ish, I think, to 24. Given the TCU offense way more credit, clearly, than they deserved. I still thought this was a good offense, and, you know, they could probably score on just about any other team in college football, but not this team. Then I also said that, you know, Georgia could probably run it into the 40s if they wanted to. Man, I think Georgia could have got it into the 70s if they wanted to. I don't really know that I have the right words for what this game was. I knew after that second drive that this game was over. At the very end of that pod, if you go back and listen to that episode, I know most of you won't, but I like to recap it for my own sake. I said that I really expected Georgia to come out with like 2 or 3 super polished drives, you know, touchdown, field goal, or touchdown, field goal, touchdown, whatever that ended up looking like. And then they just kind of lean on TCU. Man, they never let TCU get going. TCU couldn't stop them. This was complete domination from start to finish. Let's just look at some of the stats here from the box score. We'll talk defensively for Georgia first before we get into this offense. So they held Max Duggan to 14 of 22 for 152 yards, forced 2 interceptions. They held the ground game to 36 yards. Now, Max Duggan did have the lone touchdown on the ground. He snuck it in. It was a pretty clean touchdown, but that was all the dogs were going to give the Frogs in this game. 36 yards. To put that into perspective, here's the graphic from the recap. TCU was averaging 204 yards on the ground. That made them number 19 in the FBS in terms of yards. But they were going up against that number 2 rushing defense by Georgia. They've given up just 80 yards a game, allowed only 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. TCU made that 7 on the season. But like I said, that was all they were doing, holding TCU to just 36 total yards, well under their average, 160-something under their average. TCU did manage to throw, but man, not nearly as successfully as they need to. I knew they were going to try to hit those big chunk plays. Talked about that in the preview episode. It was not Quentin Johnston. It was Darius Davis, 5 for 101. No touchdowns through the air. The next receiver on the team was just 1 for 15. Below that, Jared Wiley, 2 for 14. I mean, this defense just, I did not like TCU's offense versus Georgia's defense to begin with. Let's look at the drive summary for both of these teams. Here's TCU's offense. Punt, fumble, touchdown, punt, interception, interception, into the half. Second half, punt, turnover on downs, punt. Here's how I feel. Punting in the fourth quarter of the national championship. Again, you were already down 31 to start the second half. Punting in the national championship game, in the second half of the national championship game, against an offense that you couldn't stop anyway, is probably the most self-defeatist football I've seen at a major level, definitely in the college football playoff era. I mean, I don't know what to say here. If I was a TCU fan, look, I said they deserve to be there. TCU deserved to be in the national championship game. I still believe that. That's absolutely true. They beat Michigan, okay, who was the consensus number 2 team in the country. They did lose to Kansas State in the conference championship game, in the Big 12 championship game. TCU deserved to be probably in the top 4 or 5 teams. They did not belong on the same field as Georgia. And that could not have been more clear, again, by Georgia's third possession of this game. I mean, they deserve to be there, but I would be absolutely embarrassed if I was a TCU fan or a Big 12 fan, not at my team, not for how the season ended. You should never be embarrassed for making it to the national championship game and losing, but for how this game unfolded and how dominant Georgia made the SEC look in comparison to other conferences. And we're going to talk about how the SEC stacked up against the other Power Fives here in just a moment. Let's go back really quickly and talk about this Georgia offense. Let me flip it back over to the box score here. Stetson Bennett showing up when it counts. 18 of 25 for 304, 4 touchdowns. He had 2 on the ground. Benson Robinson ran 2 in. Brock Bowers was 7 for 152 and a touchdown. Ladd McConkey 5 for 88 and 2 touchdowns. Adonai Mitchell 1 for 22. That was a touchdown. They took such good care of the ball. They were so good on defense. There was nothing TCU could do to stop them. And the way that they were playing that game, I'm not sure there was another team in the country that could have stepped onto that field and stopped Georgia the way that they were playing that night. That was so dominant. I mean, we already know it's the biggest margin of victory in a college football playoff game or in a national championship game in the college football playoff era. Maybe the most dominant national championship margin of victory ever. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But this was an absolute stomping. Like what other team in the country thinks that they want to step onto the field? Maybe Ohio State, the way they played in that Peach Bowl. I mean, that should have been the national championship game, if we're being completely honest. I mean, the committee got it very, very wrong. TCU was one of the most deserving teams. They were clearly not one of the best teams. Yes, they beat Michigan, but what I saw in the Peach Bowl between Ohio State and Georgia, that should have been the national championship game. I'm not going to belabor that point. But going into next year, I mean, if you're a Georgia fan and you look at their schedule, I'm going to save this for another episode. We're going to look at all the SEC schedules and kind of predict what their records will be, what their final records will be, and, bowl game, top 4, playoff contenders, that sort of thing. But I don't know. If you're a Georgia fan, I don't know how you don't look at next year's schedule and think that you're going to three-peat. I mean, I do. I don't see a game on Georgia's schedule for next season that they shouldn't be the favorite to win. Now, I know Stetson Bennett's not going to be there, but I mean, they got a stud coming up, Carson Beck, at that quarterback position. I mean, you got to feel really good and really confident if you're a Georgia Bulldog at this juncture in time. All right, guys, let's talk about the rest of the SEC, how the SEC stacked up against the other Power 5 schools. in bowl season. Now, this is coming straight from NCAA. This was the bowl game tracker, tracking the winning percentage and the record. It shows how many bowl games each conference participated in. I'm only going to be focusing on the P5s, the Power Fives here, okay? So that would be the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the SEC. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to point this out. The SEC had 11 teams participate in bowl games, or they played 11 bowl games. That is including the semifinal game. So that includes Georgia in the Peach Bowl, which is a bowl game in this case. It does not include their win over TCU in the national championship, just for clarification. So the SEC played 11 bowl games. The next closest to that was the Big 10 with 9 and the ACC with 9. After that, you had the Big 12 with 8 bowl games and the Pac-12 with 7. So if we're judging, how good one conference stacks up against another, well, the SEC put 11 out of 14 teams in bowl games. Now let's look at records. SEC went 7-5 in those bowl games, again, including the Peach Bowl, for a winning percentage of .583. All right. Let's look at the next two. Big 10 had 9 games. They went 5-4 with a record of .555. ACC, also with 9 bowl games, goes 5-4, same as the Big 10, with a record of .556. I don't know why this one's 556 and Big 10 is 555, even though they both went 5-4. I'm not sure what statistical maths go into making that happen, but for all intents and purposes, this is the same to me. ACC 5-4, Big 10 5-4 in bowls. They're both 555 winning percentage. Big 12 with 8, okay, 2-7. It's a winning percentage of .222. Then we have the Pac-12, 7 games. They go 3-4 with a winning percentage of .429. So not only did the SEC get the most teams into bowl games, they won more bowl games than any other conference in the FBS. Not just Power 5, but all conferences in the FBS. You want to win more games, you got to have more teams play games. It's a numbers game, baby. Now, they don't have the largest winning percentage in all of college football, but they do have the largest winning percentage of Power 5 teams in bowl games. Independence went 600. MAC went .667. But again, Independence played 5 games. MAC played 6. I mean, credit to them for winning. They did win those games. We're not talking about the same caliber of competition. We're not talking about the same level of play here. Of all Power 5 teams, SEC had the most teams in bowl games, won more games, and had the highest winning percentage of all Power 5 conferences in college football. Let's take a look at it. We'll start with the ACC here. Just kind of go in alphabetical order and look at who won, who lost. So ACC, 9 games, record 5-4. Louisville, 24-7 over Cincinnati. Wake Forest, 27-17 over Missouri in the Gasparilla Bowl. Duke, 30-13 over UCF. North Carolina loses to number 15 Oregon, 28-27. Syracuse loses to Minnesota, 28-20. Number 13 Florida State takes care of Oklahoma, 35-32 in the Cheez-It Bowl. NC State, number 23 NC State loses to Maryland, 16-12. Pitt takes care of UCLA, 37-35. And as we all know, the ACC champion, Clemson, number 7 Clemson, loses to number 6 Tennessee, 31-14 in the Orange Bowl. Let's take a look at how the Big 12 fared. 8 games, record 2-7. Now I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Had a lot of Big 12 fans trash talking in the comments of my Texas Bowl videos because Texas Tech beat 8-4 Ole Miss. Now, credit to Texas Tech. I said Texas Tech was a good team. Ole Miss came out way flatter than I expected. I thought Ole Miss would take care of business. I will eat my crow. They did not. But let's not for a second think that Ole Miss is representative of the best of the SEC. Ole Miss is 8-4. They finished the season with like 4 or 5 straight losses, okay? Now, they have some good components, but that is not one of the best SEC teams out there. Good for Texas Tech. They beat Ole Miss. I had a lot of Big 12 fans trash talking the SEC, how the SEC was overrated. A lot of Kansas State fans out there trash talking how the SEC was overrated and the Cats were going to take care of Alabama. Let's see how we did here. Record 2-7 in bowl games, okay? Baylor loses to Air Force 30-15. Oklahoma State loses to Wisconsin 24-17. Arkansas takes care of Kansas in what was the best bowl game up to that point, 55-53, triple overtime. That was a fun one. Texas Tech topped Ole Miss. They did it. Red Raiders, guns up, 42-25. Took care of them in the Texas Bowl. Woo. Oklahoma loses to Florida State, 35-32. Number 20 Texas loses to Washington, 27-20. Your conference champ, Kansas State, gets blown out by number 5, Alabama, 45-20. Fourth in the SEC, Alabama, by the way. Number 3, TCU does take care of business over Michigan. Now, they couldn't stop Michigan. They couldn't stop Michigan's offense. That was the problem in the national championship. They couldn't stop Georgia. But they beat Michigan. Credit to them. And then, of course, we all saw what happened. This doesn't count. We all saw what Georgia did to TCU. So let me go back. Not only did 4th place in the SEC, Alabama. I'm saying 4th place because Georgia's number 1. LSU technically number 2 because they were the Eastern Western Division champ. Tennessee at that number 3 because they had the head-to-head in the SEC against Alabama. So I'm putting Alabama in that number 4 spot. That's how I rank it. You might disagree. You're welcome to do that. I don't care. I'm not going to argue with you about it. But not only did 4th in the SEC, Alabama mud stomp your conference champion 45-20. But in the national championship game, Georgia beat your national title contender 65-7. That's a 58-point margin for those of y'all out there who don't want to do the math yourself. So go back, revisit that trash talk. Maybe rethink it going into the 2023 season about the SEC being overrated, okay? And I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about the Big 10 while the Big 12, y'all can let that simmer. All right, Big 10, 9 games, record 5-4. Wisconsin, 24-17 over Oklahoma State. Minnesota, 28-20 over Syracuse. Maryland, 16-12 over NC State. That was a good win for Maryland. Good bowl win. Iowa, okay, 21-0 over Kentucky. I don't know what's going on in Lexington between football, basketball. You remember the beef that Cal and Stoops had in the offseason about whether Kentucky was a football team or a basketball team? Neither. Well, turns out they're not a basketball or a football school. That Iowa defense, man, Kentucky had no offense. Iowa had no offense, but Iowa's defense way better. Too much for Kentucky. Credit to them. I thought Kentucky would at least make that a game, but if you smash the under on that one, it paid. Of course, Michigan loses to TCU in the Fiesta Bowl. Ohio State lost to Georgia in the Peach Bowl. That game was so good. Again, probably one of the best games I saw all season. If you're an Ohio State fan, you should not feel bad about that. Georgia just closed the game. It's what they've done all season. And that's the way it is in the SEC. Illinois lost to Mississippi State. Man, that was a great one. I really changed my opinion after my way too early prediction to favor Mississippi State. Great game, great tribute to Mike Leach. 19-10 for the Bulldogs there. Big Ten runner-up, Purdue. This almost looked like the national championship game. LSU 63-7 over Purdue. My goodness. Look, I know you lost the coach, backup quarterback, but hey, you got to play the game with the players and the coaches that you got. And that was not it. 63-7. Go Tigers. Then Penn State, pretty dominant performance over Utah in the Rose Bowl. That game was 35-21, but let me tell you, that game was not close. That game was not as close as even those 14 points suggest. So there you have it, Big Ten. Here we go. Let's look at the Pac-12. 7 games, record 3-3. Number 14, Oregon State, 30-3 over the Florida Gators. That was not a good matchup from the beginning. I picked Oregon State to beat Florida. Florida's got a lot of stuff going on right now. They need to work out some of those kinks and fast. Washington State loses to Fresno State 29-6. Number 15, Oregon 28-27 over North Carolina in the Holiday Bowl. Number 12, Washington 27 over number 20, Texas. A lot of numbers in there. I need to just read the scores. Washington 27-20 over Texas. I know I'm repeating some of these because I've already been through these conferences. UCLA loses to Pitt 37-35. USC loses a phenomenal Cotton Bowl to Tulane. And I said so many times on Twitter and on the pod that Tulane is not a team that any Power 5 team wants to play in this bowl game. USC got that draw, and it sucks to be them. Good for Tulane. And then Utah fall into Penn State. Again, Penn State in complete control of that game throughout the ball game. All right, let's look at the SEC. I know we've already recapped these, but I'll also give how my predictions went. So Oregon State over Florida, called that one. Wake Forest over Mizzou, called that one. Arkansas over Kansas, called that one. So I went 3-0 to start. Texas Tech over Ole Miss, lost that one. Notre Dame over South Carolina, I lost that one. I knew that would be a good game. I said in my preview that Notre Dame is a way better team than South Carolina fans were giving them credit for, and it showed up. I still thought South Carolina would win that game, maybe in overtime on a field goal with something close, but they lost by a touchdown. No shame there if you're South Carolina. You got a lot of things to be proud of this season, the way you ended, and some pieces you got coming back next year. So 3-2 so far. Then Tennessee over Clemson, picked that one. Alabama over Kansas State, picked that one. So 5-2. Iowa over Kentucky, lost that one. 5-3. Georgia dub, picked that one. Mississippi State dub, picked that one. LSU dub and Georgia dub. So I am 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And 3 in my picks. Sorry, that was Georgia over the national champ. That didn't count. 8-3. 8-3 in my bowl picks, straight up. So not bad there. If you're following along with my previews, my scores might not have been close, but I got the right outcome a majority of the time. I want to close here. Again, I'm just kind of rambling for this episode. Sorry. No script for this one, just kind of going off the cuff. But I wanted to close by looking at the end of season rankings, just to close out my argument that the SEC is the best conference in all of college football. And if you're from the ACC, if you're from the Pac-12, if you're from the Big 12, and you're from the Big 10, and that makes you mad, good. I don't care. Because I've just shown you all of the reasons why it's true. You got to win the games. Okay? You got to win the games. And the SEC did that this year. You didn't. So let's look at it here. Georgia stays at number 1 overall, as they should. I don't think there's another team in the country outside of Ohio State in that Peach Bowl that could have contended with Georgia. TCU number 2. Listen, if I was an AP voter, I'm not, never will be, wouldn't want to be. I know that TCU beat Michigan. I get it. But watching TCU get beat that badly in the national championship game and still putting them number 2, yeah, I've got issues with that. They're not even the conference champion. I'm sorry. I've just got issues with that. I would not have put them there. Michigan at 3, Ohio State at 4. Here's what I would have done. I would have put Ohio State at 2 based on the eye test. I know Michigan beat them. Michigan fans might be pissed. They're probably not listening to this anyway. But I would have had Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, TCU 3, Michigan 4. And that would have been my top 4. Now, on a neutral field, I think Alabama takes care of TCU. On a neutral field, I think Tennessee takes care of TCU. And on a neutral field, I think Penn State takes care of TCU. So based on who the best teams are, I'd have either Alabama or Tennessee in that top 4, probably Tennessee because they did beat Alabama head to head. I'm not going to belabor that point. But here to round out the top 10, Georgia 1, TCU 2, Michigan 3, Ohio State 4, Alabama 5, Tennessee 6, Penn State 7, Washington 8, Tulane 9, and Utah at 10. That's 3 SEC teams in the top 10. You also got 3 Big Ten teams, but SEC has the number 1 overall spot with Alabama and Tennessee at 5 and 6, Michigan, Ohio State at 3 and 4, Penn State at 7. You got Utah in there at 10 and Washington in there at 8 for the Pac-12. Almost said the P12. I need some sleep and some more coffee. And Tulane in there for as a non-Power 5 representative. So when you close this out, guys, when you look at bowl wins, bowl game appearances, final season rankings, I just don't know how you come to the conclusion that the SEC isn't the best conference in college football. That's always going to be the position here on this podcast moving forward into next year and the year after that and the year after that. I'm going to close out this episode here, guys. Stay tuned for the next one. Don't know what it's going to be yet. Not going to be previewing any more games. We might do a little look ahead to next season, break down each team's 2023 schedule and do some predicting wins and losses. Some great basketball going on right now. South Carolina topping Kentucky in Rupp Arena. It's literally a dumpster fire for Kentucky basketball right now. Vandy going on the road to Tennessee, putting up a fight, but the Vols coming out on top in Thompson Bowling. I don't cover college basketball like I cover college football, but I'm going to find a format that works and dig in to a lot more of that content. Going to have some of my buddies who joined me during football season back on to help me cover not just college basketball, but looking ahead to next season for college football as well. Still trying to stick to a couple episodes each week, but it all depends on content. I don't want to put out stuff just to put out stuff. I only want to put something out when there's something to talk about. So drop your suggestions in the comments. What do you want to hear about? What are some topics that you like to hear about? Do you want to hear about recruiting? Do you want to hear about transfer portal stuff? Do you want to hear more, spring football, spring practice? Do you want more basketball content? Whatever it is, guys, I'm a man of the people. I want to talk about the stuff that fans want to talk about. That's what makes me go. That's what makes this show go. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great week. Have a great weekend. I will catch y'all on the next one right here on the SEC Recap Podcast.